MAGA Republicans coming to criminal defendant Donald Trump's defense. Surprise! Trump ally gym class hero Jordan subpoenaing Mark Pomerantz, a former prosecutor in Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office. DA Bragg firing back with a scathing response, slamming Republicans for interfering in an ongoing New York criminal case, engaging in a, quote, campaign of harassment and intimidation, calling it an abuse of power, and vowing none of this will deter his office from the Trump criminal case. Now star witness Stormy Daniels is speaking out, the woman at the center of the case, saying she would testify against Donald Trump.
It's daunting, but I look forward to it. You know what I mean? Because I have nothing to hide. I'm the only one that has been telling the truth. I think having them call me in and put me on the stand legitimizes my story and who I am.
So there's no doubt if they ask you to testify, you will testify?
Oh, absolutely.
A central witness who received those hush money payments wants to go on the stand and go face to face with Donald Trump as he sits in that courtroom and spill all the tea that she's got. Next week, prosecutors are expected to turn over to Trump's defense team the first tranche of discovery materials, grand jury minutes and exhibits, and notes of witness statements. The DA specifically calling out harassment and intimidation from Congress. It comes after a flurry of threats Trump made against the judge. His social media post revealed in newly public filings from Trump's arraignment. The judge now getting threats. One official telling NBC News, quote, dozens of threats have recently been directed at the judge and his chambers. The judge warned Trump a gag order is not off the table. Joining me now is Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor, and Joyce Vance is back with me. Paul, I'll start with you. None of this is new, right? The defenses aren't new. Republicans have been defending Trump for years. His defense has always been the sort of biggie, you know, face it, not guilty. It's how I stay filthy. I'm rich. I do these sorts of things. That's not new. But I do think this idea of actually discussing the fact that Republicans and Trump's defense routinely try to intimidate people is huge. It's not new. We can go back to 2015, 2016 when he was attacking Judge Curiel. So what role do these intimidation tactics by the Republicans, by the Trump team have on this trial? I mean, could it result in a mistrial? Could it result in him violating some other law that gets him in trouble? What are the consequences of that?
So, Jason, Congress has no jurisdiction over this state criminal case. The DA's office is required by federal and state law to be independent from political interference. So I don't think that DA Bragg is going to give these Republicans anything that they want. What they're asking for violates the constitutional principle of separations of power. It would break the law for Bragg to reveal confidential grand jury information. Were the district attorney to comply with this request, he himself will be committing a crime.
So, Joyce, this is the other thing that sort of gets me about this. You know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But I do know a little bit about how legal proceedings are supposed to go. And it seems to me that, again, if your legal team is already being questioned about intimidating people and insulting people, and you're bringing in outside resources, that has to have a consequence on a potential jury or something else like that. I mean, I know they're being sequestered, but can this outside noise that the Trump team seems to be creating, can that harm them in the actual legal process above and beyond as to whether or not they're breaking the law?
It's a really great question, because a lot of this pretrial maneuvering will lead up to a motion by Trump suggesting that he can't get a fair trial. So whatever remedy he wants, move the case to Staten Island is something that's been suggested, because there's been so much less publicity in Staten Island than there has been in Manhattan. But so these issues really do have significance both for the trial and on appeal. And the reality is that good judges understand this happens in some high-profile cases with volatile defendants, and it's very important to lock it down early and make sure that people understand the case has to be tried in the courtroom, not on the courthouse steps.
So, Paul, we have the story now of Trump. This judge donated $15 to Biden for president. The judge in Trump's New York case appears to have donated $15 to Biden for president in 2020. Federal campaign contribution data also shows 2 small dollar donations given to progressive groups this same year. Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't know if $20 should even count as a donation in our current political environment. That's coffee. You couldn't even buy Clarence Thomas for that amount of money. Is the revelation of these donations going to have any impact on this case? Could that, as Joyce suggested, could that imply that the Trump team is going to say, hey, this guy is corrupt, this guy is given to a campaign, we want to change a venue?
Oh, they certainly will say that, Jonathan, but there's no law against judges donating to political campaigns. It's not a good look in a case like this. The Model Code of Judicial Ethics prohibits judges from contributing to political campaigns, but that's not binding on Judge Merchan. It's kind of advisory. So it's his decision whether to recuse. I doubt that he will. Given what you said, Jason, the trivial amount of money. Look, Judge Merchan has a reputation of conducting fair and objective trials. The judge has already presided over a trial of the Trump Organization. Any legal rulings he makes will be subject to appeal by Trump's defense team. So this will give Trump's lawyers a legitimate reason to criticize the judge, but they're going to have to play this very carefully, because if the judge stays on the case, he will have to make extremely important legal decisions. And to the extent that they can, lawyers like to stay in the good graces of the judges who are presiding over their cases.
Joyce, I want to turn now to Stormy Daniels. One of the things that's been so fascinating about her sort of willingness to engage in this trial. She says she wants to testify. She says she's not worried. She's saying bring it when it comes to the defamation suit against her. It seems like the reverse of the sort of intimidation tactics that Trump engaged in. It was 5-6 years ago that he was, calling her names, insulting her, saying he didn't know anything about her. Just from a legal strategy standpoint, could the last 5 to 7 years of verbal abuse and invective by Trump against Stormy Daniels have turned her into a witness more willing to testify against him? I mean, had he not been the same sort of sexist, abusive, monstrous person that he has been, might that make her a more reluctant witness, which ultimately would help him at this point?
So it's hard to say. I think she's been fairly forthright since these facts first surfaced. She's never shown any lack of willingness to be a witness. I'm not sure how important she is, frankly, to the DA's case, because this mostly involves internal accounting inside of Trump Towers and how these issues were presented to the former president, and less about the outreach to her, unless there's some conversation she was privy to or additional information that she can add that really buttresses their evidence. But it's, I think it's difficult for women who feel like they've been victimized by powerful men to face the kind of abuse that she has faced, as you point out, for years, the name calling. It's so inappropriate for someone with the large megaphone that Trump has to use it against a private citizen like Stormy Daniels. I think if she takes the witness stand, she'll be credible. She's a very plain-spoken person, and the jury will hear what she has to say.
So the other thing that's coming out is that D.A. Bragg is the source of intimidation. People are attacking him. They're attacking other judges in this sort of situation. Paul, when you think of high-profile cases like this, what might possibly be done from the federal government or the state government in New York to make sure these people are safe? I mean, I frankly, we have a history in this country, especially since the rise of the MAGA terrorist movement, of judges being threatened, of people sending bombs. Is there any attempt, or should there be attempts right now, to keep these judges and prosecutors safe throughout the sort of long length of this potential trial?
Great question. The Manhattan DA has layers of security, including the New York Police Department and court security officers. They've already taken the bios of employees offline because they're afraid of what might happen if people know their personal information. And as usual, the chief insider, the chief instigator is Donald Trump. At the arraignment, the judge didn't issue a gag order, but he basically told Trump to chill, not to make statements that would incite violence and civil unrest. And that very same night at Mar-a-Lago, Trump attacks the judge and the judge's wife and the judge's daughter, and he calls D.A. Bragg a criminal. So it's a crime in New York to threaten a prosecutor. And Jason, any ordinary person who's done what Trump already has done, like posting that photo of a baseball bat next to the head of D.A. Bragg, any ordinary person would have been arrested yesterday for threats.
Yeah, Joyce, I want to follow up with that real quick. Paul just said they would have been arrested, but if you or I or anybody who isn't a former twice impeached president of the United States held a baseball bat up against a prosecutor who was in the process of prosecuting them, what would be the immediate legal consequences? I mean, yeah, you get arrested. Would you be thrown in jail until your trial? Would you get some sort of fine and a gag warning? Like, what actually would be the consequences that the rest of us common people would face just for that activity alone? Very quickly.
Right. So prosecutors assess the seriousness of a threat in a situation like that. If they think that violence is imminent, they don't hesitate to act quickly. Otherwise, you try to manage the threat. You try to give people warnings, permit them to back down. If the conduct continues, though, at some point you have to take action.